Welcome back, dear friends, to the Crimson Academy's course on the Kitáb-i-Aqdas. In this section, dear friends, we're going to be talking about the Kitáb-i-Aqdas as divine education. There are many exhortations in the Kitáb-i-Aqdas calling the believers to live saintly lives and to adorn themselves with the ornament of a goodly character and divine virtues. There are many people, not Baha'is, who have been brought up to live a good life in their own traditions. They are trained from childhood to be courteous, kind, and loving. They evince many good qualities which are inculcated in them until they have become second nature. They perform good deeds habitually. Such people merit the highest praise. But because they are deprived of the spirit of faith born by God's messenger to this age, they are like exquisite lamps which have not been lit. To live one's life as a Baha'i is different insofar as the heart is illumined with the love of Bahá'u'lláh. It is this love which makes the difference and which enables the believer to mirror forth the teachings of Baha'u'lláh to others. Without this, it is impossible for a Baha'i to achieve all that he could in this life. Indeed, the story of every religion is written in the language of love. Some people recognize Baha'u'lláh intellectually. This is not sufficient. Not until the individual becomes a true lover can he acquire the spiritual capacity to serve the cause of God fully in this day. But like most things in this life which grow, there is always a beginning to this love for Baha'u'lláh. When the individual embraces the cause, the spark of faith appears in his heart. He then begins his journey of love towards Baha'u'lláh. The candle of his heart is then just lighted. But this love must be allowed to grow. This light must be allowed to become a great fire. When a person finds a friend he likes, the only way by which he can strengthen the ties of friendship and love is to get to know his friend and become more intimate with him. Should he stay and remain aloof, the friendship will not endure. The journey of a lover to his beloved may begin with mere acquaintance, but it can develop into a deep love as a result of close association and a selfless devotion. Similarly, a believer must continue his journey of love to His Holiness Baha'u'lláh. The most important step in achieving this is to reread the words of Baha'u'lláh in order to commune with him and become attracted to his holy person. Indeed, this is one of his commandments in the Kitáb-i-Aqdas. He enjoins his followers to recite his words twice a day, in the morning and the evening, and states that those who do not have failed to fulfill their pledge to the covenant of God. These are his words in that book. Recite ye the verses of God every morning and evening. Whoso reciteth them not have truly failed to fulfill his pledge to the covenant of God and his testament, and whoso in this day turneth away therefrom hath indeed turned away from God since time immemorial. Fear ye God, O concourse of my servants. Take heed lest excessive reading and too many acts of piety in the daytime and the night season make you vainglorious. Should a person recite but a single verse from the holy writings in a spirit of joy and radiance, this would be better for him than reciting wearily all the scriptures of God, the help in peril, the self-subsisting. Recite ye the verses of God to such measure that ye be not overtaken with fatigue or boredom. Burden not your souls, so as to cause exhaustion and weigh them down, but rather endeavor to lighten them, that they may soar on the wings of revealed verses unto the dawning places of his signs. This is conducive to near access unto God, were ye to comprehend. In another passage in the Kitáb-i-Aqdas, he states, "Immerse yourselves in the ocean of my words, that ye may unravel its secrets and discover all the pearls of wisdom that lie hid in its depths." The reading of the words of his Bahá'u'lláh exerts the same influence upon the soul as food does to the body. It enables the soul to draw nigh to Baha'u'lláh and become filled with his love. Without regular reading of the writings twice a day, a Baha'i cannot grow spiritually, and there is no alternative to compensate for this loss. In the Kitab-i-Aqdas, His Holiness Baha'u'lláh states that there is no merit in reading his words when tired. He says that to read a few lines with a spirit of joy and fragrance is better than to read a whole book when depressed and weary. This commandment is very much in tune with the law of nature, which advocates that a person eat his food only when he is hungry. Another similarity is that in nature, one must eat food regularly every day. To eat once in a lifetime is not sufficient. It is the same with reading the words of God, which is the food for the spirit. To read the holy writings once in a while is not enough. As ordained by Baha'u'lláh, the individual must, if he is to grow spiritually, read his words, which are recorded in his tablets, twice every day. These words, with all their vivifying forces, must then be allowed to penetrate the heart and to strengthen one's faith. The reading of the words of Baha'u'lláh not only enables the faithful to increase his love for him every day, but also deepens him in the faith as well. Deepening in the faith is often misunderstood. It is taken to imply participation in study classes, courses, and intellectual discussions. Often in these discussions, the individual may inject his own ideas as well as modern theories into the teachings of Baha'u'lláh and make the faith appear as complicated as a highly involved scientific theory. In fact, the study of the faith is so simple that any person with common sense, even if he lacks education, can fully understand its truth, provided his heart is pure. If we look at the talks of Abdu'l-Baha in the Western world, we notice how in simple language he explained profound subjects. Real deepening occurs when the believer reads the writings with the eyes of faith, knowing that he is reading the Word of God, not the words of men, a word which is charged with tremendous potency. Deepening also takes place when the believer associates with someone who is on fire with the love of Baha'u'lláh. The very company of such a person increases one's faith in God. Baha'u'lláh states in the hidden words, "He that seeketh to commune with God, let him betake himself to the companionship of his loved ones, and he that desireth to hearken unto the word of God, let him give ear to the words of his chosen ones." This is why those who meet a true servant of Baha'u'lláh often become filled with a new spirit. In the heroic age of the faith, the believers were deepened in faith by meeting together and sharing their knowledge and love of Baha'u'lláh. One devoted Baha'i who had been in his presence whose heart was filled with his love, or who had received tablets from him, could impart his fire and faith, as well as his knowledge and understanding to others who associated with him. In those days, believers did not have access to all the writings and often did not know much about the teachings of Baha'u'lláh, but their hearts were so filled with his love that a great many laid down their lives in his path. There may be a tendency today to become too academic, even mechanical in the study of the faith. A purely intellectual approach may so cloud the heart that the rays of the sun of truth are unable to shine within it. What the believer needs in addition to knowledge of the faith is to open his heart to the influences of the revelation of Baha'u'lláh, to commune with his spirit, rejoice in his name, and seek especially the companionship of his true lovers. Without the infusion of the spirit of faith in his life, without turning with his heart in humbleness to Baha'u'lláh, he cannot deepen himself in the cause, because the knowledge of God is first reflected within the heart of man, and then his intellect will grasp it. This is clear in the writings. And now let there be a word of warning concerning this vital subject. Reading the writings of Baha'u'lláh, important as it is, can never be conducive to spiritual progress unless it is combined with service to the cause. Should a person take food regularly and in abundance, but fail to move about and use his muscles every day, he would soon become an invalid. In the same way, the study of the writings must be accompanied by deeds which are enjoined by Baha'u'lláh in his teachings and laws. If the individual who has recognized the station of Baha'u'lláh immerses himself in the ocean of his words, if he opens his heart to the influences of his revelation, if he associates with devoted Baha'is who are on fire with the faith and eschews fellowship with the ungodly, and if he arises to serve the cause, then his love for Baha'u'lláh will increase day by day, and he will become a deep Baha'i. His Holiness Baha'u'lláh, in the Kitáb-i-Aqdas, has placed an enormous responsibility on parents for the proper upbringing and education of their children. These are his words in that book. Unto every father hath been enjoined the instruction of his son and daughter in the art of reading and writing, and in all that have been laid down in the holy tablet. He that putteth away that which is commanded unto him, the trustees are then to take from him that which is required for their instruction, if he be wealthy, and if not, the matter devolveth upon the house of justice. Verily, have we made it a shelter for the poor and needy. He that bringeth up his son, or the son of another, it is as though he have brought up a son of mine. Upon him rest my glory, my loving kindness, my mercy that have compassed the world. His Holiness Abdul Baha, in one of his tablets, states that if the parents fail in the proper upbringing of their children, they have committed a sin that God cannot forgive. Bringing up children according to Baha'u'lláh is not merely teaching them good manners and arranging for their education. It has far-reaching implications. Baha'i education consists of academic as well as spiritual education. The former can be acquired in all the schools of the world. The latter, which from the Baha'i point of view is more important, is the acquiring of the knowledge of God and his manifestations, the understanding of the mysteries of creation, the becoming well versed in the teachings of Baha'u'lláh, the acquiring of good character, and the becoming equipped for serving the world of humanity. The following words of His Holiness Bahá'u'lláh, gleaned from his writings, demonstrate the importance which is attached to the upbringing of children. Knowledge is as wings to man's life, and a ladder for his ascent. Its acquisition is incumbent upon everyone. The knowledge of such sciences, however, should be acquired as can profit the peoples of the earth, and not those which begin with words and end with words. In truth, knowledge is a veritable treasure for man, and a source of glory, of bounty, of joy, of exaltation, of cheer and gladness unto him. Schools must first train the children in the principles of religion, so that the promise and the threat recorded in the books of God may prevent them from the things forbidden and or adorn them with the mantle of the commandments. But this in such a measure that it may not injure the children by resulting in ignorant fanaticism and bigotry. We prescribe unto all men that which will lead to the exaltation of the word of God amongst his servants, and likewise to the advancement of the world of being and the uplift of souls. To this end, the greatest means is education of the child. To this must each and all hold fast. We have verily laid this charge upon you in manifold tablets, as well as in my most holy book. Well is it with him who deferreth thereto. We ask of God that he will assist each and every one to obey this inescapable command that hath appeared and been caused to descend through the pen of the Ancient of Days. His Holiness Abdul Baha has also stressed the importance of child education in many of his tablets. The following are a few examples. It is for this reason that in this new cycle, education and training are recorded in the Book of God as obligatory and not voluntary. That is, it is enjoined upon the father and mother as a duty to strive with all effort to train their daughter and the son, to nurse them from the breast of knowledge, and to rear them in the bosom of sciences and arts. Should they neglect this matter, they shall be held responsible and worthy of reproach in the presence of the stern Lord. From the very beginning, the children must receive divine education and must continually be reminded to remember their God. Let the love of God pervade their inmost being, commingled with their mother's milk. My wish is that these children should receive a Baha'i education, so that they may progress both here and in the kingdom, and rejoice thy heart. In a time to come, morals will degenerate to an extreme degree. It is essential that children be reared in the Baha'i way, that they may find happiness both in this world and the next. If not, they shall be beset by sorrows and troubles, for human happiness is founded upon spiritual behavior. The Baha'i teachings on child education attach great importance to the role which a mother plays in bringing up children. These are the words of His Holiness Abdul Baha concerning this vital role of mothers. Today it is obligatory for the loved ones of God and their imperative duty to educate the children in reading, writing, the various branches of knowledge, and the expansion of consciousness, that on all levels they may go forward day by day. The mother is the first teacher of the child, for children at the beginning of life are fresh and tender as a young twig, and can be trained in any fashion you desire. If you rear the child to be straight, he will grow straight. in perfect symmetry. It is clear that the mother is the first teacher and that it is she who establisheth the character and conduct of the child. Wherefore, O ye loving mothers, know ye that in God's sight the best of all ways to worship him is to educate the children and train them in all the perfections of humankind, and no nobler deed than this can be imagined. One important aspect of the role of the mother in child education and spiritual training is seen in the emphasis which the Baha'i teachings place on the education of girls. For one day they will become mothers, and the first educator of the child is the mother. These and other basic teachings on child education will enable future educationalists to formulate a program of Baha'i education. As human society inclines itself more and more towards Baha'i ideals, these teachings will be adopted by mankind. The following was written on behalf of the beloved guardian in an answer to a question concerning the Baha'i educational program. You have asked him for detailed information concerning the Baha'i educational program. There is as yet no such thing as a Baha'i curriculum, and there are no Baha'i publications exclusively devoted to this subject, since the teachings of Baha'u'lláh and Abdul Baha do not present a definite and detailed educational system, but simply offer certain basic principles and set forth a number of teaching ideals that should guide future Baha'i educationalists in their efforts to formulate an adequate teaching curriculum, which would be in full harmony with the spirit of the Baha'i teachings, and would thus meet the requirements and needs of the modern age. These basic principles are available in the sacred writings of the cause, and should be carefully studied and gradually incorporated in various college and university programs. But the task of formulating a system of education which would be officially recognized by the cause and enforced as such throughout the Baha'i world is one which the present day generation of believers cannot obviously undertake, and which has to be gradually accomplished by Baha'i scholars and educationalists of the future. Educating children and youth is of such paramount importance in the Baha'i teachings that His Holiness Baha'u'lláh has praised the work of teachers and educationalists very highly. The teaching profession is held in such high esteem by him that in the Kitáb-i-Aqdas he is ordained in cases of intestacy for an inheritance to be divided among 7 categories of people, all from within the family, except the last, which is the teacher or teachers. In his writings, he has showered his favors and bounties in abundance upon those teachers who have recognized his station and are engaged in both spiritual and academic education. His Holiness Abdul Baha has praised the station of teachers who are devoted to their profession. In a tablet, he describes their service as true worship of God and states that they are the spiritual fathers of the children whom they teach, and therefore their work is highly meritorious in the sight of God. In many of his tablets, His Holiness Baha'u'lláh has enjoined upon his followers to teach his faith to the peoples of the world. In the Kitab-i-Aqdas too, he exhorts the faithful to arise in the service of his cause, and refers to teaching as the crowning glory of every righteous deed. And the primary purpose of teaching is to bring a soul to its God and it is therefore regarded by Baha'u'lláh as the most meritorious of all deeds. The prerequisites of teaching are to be found in the writings of Baha'u'lláh and Abdul Baha and the beloved guardian, as enumerated some of them in his letter entitled The Advent of Divine Justice. They may be summarized in a few words: living one's life in accordance with Baha'i teachings. His Holiness Baha'u'lláh, in one of his tablets, states, God hath prescribed unto everyone the duty of teaching his cause. Whoever ariseth to discharge this duty must needs, ere he proclaimeth his message, to adorn himself with the ornament of an upright and praiseworthy character, so that his words may attract the hearts of such as are receptive to his call. Without it, he can never hope to influence his hearers. This statement leaves no room for doubt, for Baha'u'lláh says, without it, he can never hope to influence his hearers. The word never is very emphatic and rules out any other method. In numerous other tablets, Baha'u'lláh has revealed similar statements. His Holiness Abdul Baha, in a tablet, writes, the aim is this: the intention of the teacher must be pure, his heart independent, his spirit attracted, his thought at peace, his resolution firm, his magnanimity exalted, and in the love of God a shining torch. Should he become as such, his sanctified breath will even affect the rock. Otherwise, there will be no result whatsoever. The emphasis of the last sentence is clear. Otherwise, there will be no result whatsoever. There are numerous tablets of His Holiness Abdul Baha with similar conclusions. The beloved guardian Shoghi Effendi has also drawn our attention to this truth in many of his letters. We share with you one celebrated passage. Not by the force of numbers, not by the mere exposition of a set of new and noble principles, not by an organized campaign of teaching, no matter how worldwide and elaborate in its character, not even by the staunchness of our faith or the exaltation of our enthusiasm, can we ultimately hope to vindicate in the eyes of a critical and skeptical age the supreme claim of the Abha revelation. One thing, and only one thing, will unfailingly and alone secure the undoubted triumph of this sacred cause, namely, the extent to which our own inner life and private character mirror forth in their manifold aspects the splendor of those eternal principles proclaimed by Baha'u'lláh. Here the beloved guardian Shoghi Effendi leaves no alternative to this vital prerequisite for teaching, for he says, and let us note his double emphasis, one thing and only one thing will unfailingly and alone secure the undoubted triumph of this sacred cause. Having discussed one of the most important prerequisites for teaching, friends, let us now examine the work of teaching itself. There are no set methods or procedures, although we have been given certain principles and guidelines by the author of the faith and by Abdul Baha and by the beloved guardian Shoghi Effendi. And these principles and guides are at variance with standards and methods current outside the faith, where frequently every expedient measure is used to influence people and convert them to various ideologies. The cause of Baha'u'lláh is founded on the truth of God's revelation, and truth cannot be clothed in false standards. It cannot employ the techniques of salesmanship, propaganda, expediency, and compromise. The methods used in the commercial world to attract people to new ideas, such as extravagant and sensational publicity based on slogans, extreme statements, and similar gimmicks, are all alien to the cause of God. In his teaching work, a Baha'i presents the message of Baha'u'lláh as one would offer a gift to a king. Since his primary object in teaching is not to increase numbers, but rather to bring a soul to its God, he ought to approach his fellow men with feelings of love and humility, and above all, take to them the transforming power of Baha'u'lláh and nothing of himself. Indeed, if he tries to project himself by impressing upon the listener his knowledge and accomplishments, and aims to establish the ascendancy of his arguments while teaching the faith, then the power of Baha'u'lláh cannot reach him. Success in teaching depends on one's ability and readiness to draw from the power of Baha'u'lláh. There is no alternative. If the believer does not open the way for Baha'u'lláh through his love for him, by his life, and by teaching his cause with devotion, his confirmations and assistance cannot reach him, and he will fail in his service to him. Those who rank foremost among Baha'i teachers were always conscious of the presence of Baha'u'lláh at every stage of their teaching activities. It was because of the consciousness of his presence that they were enabled to approach with genuine love and humility those who were seeking the truth, attracting them with the warmth of their faith and the creative power of their words. It was this consciousness which enabled them to radiate the glory of the newborn faith of God, to demonstrate its truth, to promote its interests, to withstand the onslaught of its enemies, and to win imperishable victories for their Lord. His Holiness Baha'u'lláh often counseled his followers how to teach the faith. For example, he directed Haji Muhammad Tahir al-Mari, when he was leaving his presence, to engage in teaching the cause in his native city of Yazd, and gave him some instructions as how to teach. Foremost among these instructions was to pray for the seeker, and urge him also to pray so that the confirmations of God might reach him and open his eyes to the truth of the cause. Another counsel was to begin teaching with the account of the history of the religions of the past and their founders, similar to the accounts given in the Kitáb-i-Aqdas. This would enable the inquirer to get an insight into his own religion, that he might recognize the truth and the reality of the founder of his own faith. When this stage was reached, the individual would be ready to appreciate and understand the cause of God for this day. To cite another example, there is a tablet from His Holiness Baha'u'lláh in which Faris, the Christian Syrian who embraced the faith in Alexandria, is exhorted to teach with wisdom. He counsels him to disclose to people everything about the cause at first. He counsels him not to disclose to people everything about the cause at first, but rather to teach them little by little until they are ready to absorb more. He likens this process to feeding infants who need to be given a little milk at a time until they grow in strength and are able to digest other food. This exhortation of His Holiness Baha'u'lláh is the basis of teaching the cause of God. The principles involved are very similar to those which a school teacher employs in teaching his pupils little by little and in accordance with their capacity. Before teaching the cause to any person, it is important to know his background and capacity. The most successful teachers are those who, after familiarizing themselves with the beliefs and ideas of an individual, reveal the truths of the faith gradually to him, but what little they impart is the correct remedy and is so potent as to influence and stimulate the soul and enable it to take a step forward and become ready to absorb more. Haji Mirza Haidara Ali, the celebrated Baha'i teacher, to whose outstanding services we have already talked about in earlier courses, has left to posterity the following account of one of his memorable interviews with Baha'u'lláh in Akka, in the course of which he spoke these words about the teaching the cause of God. The way to teach is to have a pleasing disposition and to deal with people in a spirit of loving kindness. One must acknowledge whatever the other person says, even if it is vain imaginings, beliefs which are the result of blind imitation or absurd talk. One should avoid in engaging in arguments or adducing proofs which bring out stubbornness and contention in the other person. This is because he finds himself defeated, and this will lead to his becoming more veiled from the truth and will add to his waywardness. The right way is to acknowledge the other person's statements and then present him with the alternative point of view and invite him to examine it to see whether it is true or false. Of course, when it is presented to him with courtesy, affection, and loving kindness, he will hear and will not be thinking in terms of defense. To find answers and look for proofs, he will acknowledge and admit the points. When the person realizes that the purpose behind discussions is not wrangling or the winning of arguments, but rather to convey the truth and to reveal human qualities and divine perfections, he will of course show fairness, his inner eyes and ears and heart will open, and through the grace of God, he will become a new creation and will possess new eyes and new ears. His Holiness Baha'u'lláh spoke a great deal about the evils of controversial argument and aiming to become a winner in discussion. He then said, "The most great branch will listen to any absurd talk with such attentiveness that the person concerned believes that he is deriving enlightenment from him. However, little by little, and in a way that the person cannot realize, he bestows upon him a new vision and a new understanding." The talks of Abdul Baha in the West provide the best example of wisdom in teaching. He addressed audiences who were almost alien to the history and genesis of the faith, and unfamiliar with the claims and the station of its founder. Yet, he disclosed to them with simplicity and brevity only those essential truths which they were capable of understanding, and which constituted the first stepping stones for their eventual recognition of the stupendous message of His Holiness Baha'u'lláh. He clearly avoided at that early stage any elaboration on the many implications of the station of Baha'u'lláh and his revelation, as well as the unfoldment of his laws and his world order in the future. Instead, he bestowed upon everyone who had the capacity a measure of his all-embracing love, which animated and sustained those few who embraced the faith in the West. Perhaps it is a temptation for a Baha'i teacher, especially if he is a knowledgeable one, to pour out upon a seeker all his knowledge and bombard him with a series of profound utterances and lengthy discussions, with the aim of proving the truth of his own arguments. When this happens, it blocks the way for the power of Baha'u'lláh to reach the heart of the seeker and enlighten him with the light of faith. In following the footsteps of the exemplar of the faith of Baha'u'lláh, we may observe that when someone asked Abdul Baha a question, he often did not give the person all the answers. He gently prepared him to understand the subject. For example, he talked about something which seemed unrelated to the question, but in the end led him to discover the truth. One may cite the example of Howard Colby Ives, a Unitarian minister in the United States, who became attracted to His Holiness Abdul Baha when he visited that country and eventually became an ardent believer. One gathers from reading his fascinating chronicles, Portals to Freedom, that Abdul Baha led him to the path of truth very gently and slowly. Dear friends, we share with you the following story as recorded in that book. In all of my many opportunities of meeting, of listening to, and talking with His Holiness Abdul Baha, I was impressed and constantly more deeply impressed with his method of teaching souls. That is the word. He did not attempt to reach the mind alone. He sought the soul, the reality of everyone he met. Oh, he could be logical, even scientific in his presentation of an argument, as he demonstrated constantly in the many addresses I have heard him give and the many more I have read. But it was not the logic of the schoolman, not the science of the classroom. His lightest word, his slightest association with a soul was shot through with an illuminating radiance which lifted the hearer to a higher plane of consciousness. Our hearts burned within us when he spoke, and he never argued, of course, nor did he press a point. He left one free. There was never an assumption of authority. Rather, he was ever the personification of humility. He taught as if offering a gift to a king. He never told me what I should do, beyond suggesting that what I was doing was right. Nor did he ever tell me what I should believe. He made truth and love so beautiful and royal that the heart perforce did reverence. He showed me by his voice, manner, bearing, smile, how I should be, knowing that out of the pure soil of being the good fruit of deeds and words would surely spring. There was a strange, awe-inspiring mingling of humility and majesty, relaxation and power in his slightest word or gesture, which made me long to understand its source. What made him so different, so immeasurably superior to any other man I had ever met? What made him so different, so immeasurably superior to any other man I had ever met? Another story which throws light on the subject is the following by Howard Colby Ives. So one cold spring day, a strong east wind blowing, I made a special journey to ask Abdul Baha about renunciation. I found the house at 96th Street almost deserted. It seemed that Abdul Baha was spending a day or two at the home of one of the friends on 78th Street, and so I walked there and found him on the point of returning to the home I had just left. But I was too intent on my mission to allow difficulties to interfere. I sought one of the Persian friends, and pointing to the passage in the little volume I carried in my pocket, I asked him if he could request Abdul Baha to speak to me for a few moments on this subject, and I read it to him so that there should be no mistake. Prevent me not from turning to the horizon of renunciation. Returning, he handed me the book saying that Abdul Baha requested that I walk with him back to 96th Street and he would talk with me on the way. I recall that there was quite a little procession of us, a dozen or so, mostly composed of the Persian friends, but a few others. Lua Getzinger was one, I remember. The east wind was penetrating. I buttoned my coat closely with a little shiver. But Abdul Baha strode along with his abba, his cloak, floating in the wind. He looked at me as we walked together at the head of the little group, with a slightly quizzical glance. He said that I seemed cold, a slightly amused glance accompanying the words, and I unaccountably felt a little disturbed. Why should I not feel cold? Could one be expected to live even above the weather? But this slight remark was indicative. Always his slightest words affected me as a summons. Come up higher, he seemed to say. As we walked a few paces ahead of the others, he talked at length about horizons, of how the sun of reality, like the physical sun, rose at different points. The son of Moses at one point, the son of Jesus at another, the son of Muhammad, the son of Bahá'u'lláh at still others. But always the same sun, though the rising points varied greatly. Always we must look for the light of the sun, he said, and not keep our eyes so firmly fixed on its last point of rising that we fail to see its glory when it rises in the new spiritual springtime. Once or twice he stopped, and with his stick drew on the sidewalk an imaginary horizon, and indicated the rising points of the sun. A strange sight it must have been to the casual passer-by. I was greatly disappointed I had heard him speak on this subject, and had read about it in some answered questions. It was not of horizons I wanted to hear, but of renunciation. And I was deeply depressed also because I felt that he should have known my desire for light on the subject, and responded to my longing, even if I had not been so explicit in my request. But I had been most explicit. As we approached our destination, he became silent. My disappointment had long since merged into great content. Was it not enough to be with him? What, after all, could he tell me about renunciation that was not already in my own heart? Perhaps the way to learn about it was by doing, and I might begin by giving up the longing to have him talk to me about it. Truly, as the outer silence deepened, my heart burned within me as he talked with me on the way. We came at last to the steps leading up to the entrance door. Abdul Baha paused with one foot resting on the lower step, while the little group slowly passed him and entered the house. Abdul Baha made as if to follow, but instead he turned and looking down at me from the little elevation of the step, with that subtle meaning in eyes and voice which seemed to accompany his slightest word, and which to me was always so unfathomable and so alluring. He said that I must always remember that this is a day of great things, very great things. I was speechless. It was not for me to answer. I did not have the faintest inkling of what lay behind those words. The resonant voice, that penetrating glance. Then he turned and again made as if to ascend, but again he paused and turned his now luminous face towards me. My foot was raised to follow, but as he turned, I of course paused also and hung uncertainly between rest and motion. He repeated, saying to me so impressively, so earnestly, that I must never forget this. This is a day for very great things. What could he mean? What deep significance lay behind these simple words? Why should he speak so to me? Had it anything to do with that still alluring thought of renunciation? Again, Abdul Baha turned to ascend, and I made to follow. But for the third time he paused, and turning, as it seemed, the full light of his spirit upon me, he said again, but this time in what seemed like a voice of thunder, with literally flashing eyes, and emphatically raised hand, that I should remember his words, that this is a day for very great things, very great things. These last three words rang out like a trumpet call. The long deserted city block, the long deserted city block seemed to echo them. I was overwhelmed. I seemed to dwindle, almost to shrivel, where I stood as that beautifully dominant figure, that commanding and appealing voice, surrounded me like a sea, and blotted out, for the moment at least, all the petty world and my petty self with it. Who and what was I to be summoned to accomplish great things, very great things? I did not even know what things were great in this world. Ori, with misbegotten emphasis. After what seemed a very long moment, in which his burning eyes probed my soul, he gently smiled. The great moment had passed. He was again the courteous, kindly, humble host, the father whom thought I knew. He touched his fez so that it stood at what I called the humorous angle, and a slightly quizzical smile was around his mouth as he rapidly ascended the steps and entered the open door. I followed closely. We passed through the few steps of the hall to the stairs. I remember the wondering, slightly envious glances that followed me as I followed Abdul Baha up the stairs. The upper hall was empty, and Abdul Baha swept through it and up another flight to his room, a large front room on the third floor, and still I followed. I have often marveled since at my temerity. Had I known more, or felt less, I never should have dared. It is said that fools rush in where angels fear to tread. Perhaps that is why. Perhaps that is the way that fools are cured of their folly. We came to the door of Abdul Baha's room. He had not invited me there, nor had he looked once behind him to see that I was following, and it was with much inward trepidation that I paused at the threshold as he entered the room. Would he be displeased? Had I overstepped the bounds of the respect due Abdul Baha? Had I been lacking in due humility? But my heart was humility itself. He must know that. He swung the door wide and turning beckoned me in. Again I was alone with Abdul Baha. There was the bed in which he slept, the chair in which he sat. The late afternoon sunlight lay palely across the floor, but I saw nothing. I was conscious only of him, and that I was alone with him. The room was very still. No sound came from the street, nor from the lower rooms. The silence deepened as he regarded me with that loving, all-embracing, all-understanding look which always melted my heart. A deep content and happiness flooded my being. A little flame seemed lit within my breast, and then Abdul Baha spoke. He simply asked me if I were interested in renunciation. Nothing could have been more unexpected. I had entirely forgotten the question, which had so engrossed my thoughts an hour since. Or was it that in that hour during which the word renunciation had not been mentioned, all that I wished or needed to know about it had been vouchsafed me? I had no words to answer his question. Was I interested? I could not say I was, and I would not say I was not. I stood before him silent, while his whole being seemed to reach out to embrace me. Then his arm was around me, and he led me to the door. I left his presence with my soul treading the heights. I felt as though I had been admitted, for the moment at least, into the ranks of the martyrs, and it was a goodly fellowship indeed. During all the long years of renunciation that followed, the memory of that walk with him, my disappointment that he had not understood, his ringing challenge, "This is a day for very great things," my following him up those long stairs without even knowing whether he wished me to or not, and then the question wrapped in that sublime love, "Are you interested in renunciation?" has risen before me, a comforting and inspiring challenge. Indeed, I was interested, and my interest has never flagged from that day to this. But I never dreamed that renunciation could be so glorious. Thank you, dear friends.